This short YouTube is to demonstrate the power of the Windows 10 and 11 Task Manager. I think it's a great tool that's really underestimated in terms of its diagnostic capabilities and what you can find out about how well your machine is running. So in this video, we're just going to go through some of the things you can find within Windows Task Manager, and I'll run through a demonstration. You can get into the Windows 10 Task Manager in two ways. You can either go down to the taskbar and right-click on it and then left-click on Task Manager. That's one way. Or you can right-click on the Start menu button and left-click on Task Manager. Either way will get you to generally a small screen like this, which just shows some of the applications that are running, or shows the applications that are running. This gives you very little information, but if you click on more details, you get a lot more. And you get a lot of tabs across the top. Label things like processes, performance, app history, startup, users, detailed services. I find the two most interesting ones are processes and performance. And these can give you a really good insight into how well your Windows 10 or 11 machine is running. The Processes tab here just lists, it's grouped in two groups. One's are the running apps, of which Task Manager is one of them, and then all the background processes, in total 122. And each of those processes, and they're all listed in alphabetical order, those processes are shown as background processes as opposed to applications. And then in a publisher column, you can see who is the publisher of each of those processes. Further across, of course, you can see how much of the central processing unit, CPU, is being used in total and individually by the processes and apps. You can see what the memory is being used by the individual processes and apps, and what the disk read-write activity is, and even the network activity. These columns across the top, you can add or remove these columns to your liking. So if you right-click anywhere on this row, you can turn off things like type, the publisher, the CPU, memory, and network, or you can add these others that I haven't added in. So you can add additional information or remove information if you're not interested in it. So very clever. If you have clicked on name, it will automatically do these in alphabetical order, with the apps, however many there are, at the top. If you expand out Google Chrome, you'll realize Google Chrome has a heap of different sub-processes going on, in fact 14. If you collapse that down, you see Task Manager just has the one process, which is the one we're looking at. If you click on other columns like CPU, you can organize it so that it shows the applications and processes that are taking the most CPU. As in this case, you can see that Google Chrome is taking the highest because it's at the highest point in the list. The same with disk. If I click on disk, it will reorder these in a situation where the application or process that's taking the most disk activity is shown here, and the same for network. If we go back to name and put them in alphabetical order again, you can see it in a more logical sense. This is really great to work out if your machine is running high here, then you can click on this title here and look at what are the top CPU users in your machine at the time. Now this is quite high for Google Chrome because it's actually recording this video as a Google Chrome extension. So that's why Google Chrome is running much higher than it would be if it was just idle. Go back to name. If you go then to Performance tab, you get even better indications of what's happening on your machine. This is to me like a bit like the dashboard of a car. You can see where the effort's going inside the machine in terms of a graph. The graphs are moving with current time at the right-hand end, and it's moving to the left. So when you do something like open another application, you'll find this suddenly jumps up significantly. And then as it settles down again, it'll come down. On the left-hand side, you can see you've got small graphs for CPU, memory, disk, and other disks within the machine. This machine has 4 disks, 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 of which are solid-state drives, these and these, and 2 of which are hard disk drives, spinning drives. Then you can see your network activity and GPU, general processor. In this case, NVIDIA is the graphics card in the machine. If you click on any of these graphs, then it takes over this big area here and indicates it. So if I click on SSD, it will show the disk and what its disk is. It's a solid state Samsung disk Evo, and it's 250 gigabytes, and it will show the disk transfer rates down here. If I go to disk 1, it'll show its Western Digital disk and the model number. And because there's nothing happening on that disk, it's just quiet. So this gives you a good idea what's happening in your machine, particularly for the CPU, I find the most interesting. But also the memory is important, and the primary disk, C drive disk activity is really important. There is other information here, which is things like app history and startup programs, whether they're disabled or enabled. You can see the users on it and how much memory each user is taking. It's just one user here. And you can get other details about running processes and services. But the key ones really are processes and performance. If you've got a process out of control, this will show the process itself and the CPU and disk maybe activity it's doing. And you can actually turn any one of these off at any one time. So for example, Acrobat Update Service, which is really just a service to check that Adobe Acrobat's up to date. If I right click it, I can say End Task, and that task will disappear. So if you have a process that's suddenly got out of control or doing something, you can go in here and turn that process off. But just be careful, it doesn't do a lot of good if you turn off things like the Explorer service or key services that keep the machine running. So you've just got to be a little bit careful and a bit judicious about what you turn off and don't turn off, because there's a lot of services here. And a lot of them are fairly innocuous and can be turned off without any problem, but you might find you turn one off and the whole system crashes. Usually not an issue, you just reboot the machine and you're back into business. But it gives you a good idea of what's going on in the background. So between the two of them, You get a lot of information, and it's particularly interesting right at the beginning when you boot your Windows 10 or 11 machine up. If you boot the machine, as soon as you get to the desktop, just try and open Task Manager by clicking, as I showed you, one of the two methods of opening Task Manager as soon as you can. In other words, as soon as the machine will let you open Task Manager, try and open it. And that's usually within 10-15 seconds of the desktop appearing. What you will find when that happens is the disk activity, whether it's hard drive or solid state drive, the disk activity will be really high. The CPU activity might be 20, 30, 40%, but the disk activity you will see is really high. And what's happening is that as soon as you boot a Windows machine, Microsoft has deemed that it will go and check if there's any updates it needs to do before it'll carry on with your tasks. So this is why a machine is relatively slow when it just first gets to the desktop. It's slow not because probably the CPU is overloaded, but maybe the disk is overloaded. And this is really true if your C drive is a spinning drive, and particularly if it's an old spinning drive. So a 6-year-old laptop with a spinning drive in it, you'll find that the drive is probably running at 100% for the first 5 minutes after getting to the desktop. And this is why the machine feels so sluggish. It's just not being able to respond fast enough. And the best thing you can do in that situation is replace that 5 or 6-year-old spinning drive with a new solid state drive. It's not a hard problem to move it, to change it over. And these days, solid state drives are so relatively cheap compared to what they were 5 years ago, that it's probably the best way to give your machine a new lease of life. So have a look at Task Manager and see what you can find between the processes that are happening in the background and the individual performance of the elements will tell you a lot about your machine. It's the first place I go to when I'm doing a tune-up of a machine or checking a machine out. The first thing I'll do is go to Task Manager because it'll tell me what's happening under the bonnet, as it were. Okay, so I hope this is a useful demonstration of Task Manager. Give it a go and have a look what you can find out.